2 years when it was released, Poco F1 more than attracted attention. In fact, Xiaomi created quite a shake on the mobile market with that specific model. The audience has been eagerly awaiting for a successor, and now the Poco F2 is finally here. In this video, we go in depth with everything it brings, as well as our hands-on impressions after using it for a while. As we all know, miracles can happen, but they're usually a one-time thing. Poco F1 was one of those, and we all kind of knew it wasn't going to happen again. The era of flagship killers is definitely behind us. Poco F1 was perhaps the only model truly worthy of that title, but mainly due to its price tag. Although it had the same chipset as the flagships, it definitely lagged in terms of other features compared to the best models. Its main selling point was that it was about 3 times cheaper than true flagships. Compared to a roughly 35% difference between F2 and the current flagships, you get the idea. It's like Xiaomi didn't even bother to make another phone in the style of F1. We should say right away that the Poco F2 is not a phone designed from scratch, but a rebranded Redmi K30 Pro, which Xiaomi announced 2 months earlier. Of course, that doesn't have to be a bad thing, quite the contrary. With the Poco F1 specs and features, buyers did not have much of a dilemma. There was simply no phone on the market that could come close to its price to performance ratio. The Poco F2 Pro is different. The starting price is significantly higher, but so is the quality of the cameras and the materials used. The F2 is therefore missing that no-brainer deal moment, but is still one step ahead of the competition, because the next best device in this price range comes with the Snapdragon 765G chipset. The Poco F2 Pro, with its distinctive washing machine appearance on the back, leaves the impression of a robust device, primarily due to its dimensions. The almost 6.7-inch screen has, in today's terms, cleverly hidden edges which are more prominent only on the bottom. The frame is connected to the screen bezel, so the front side looks quite impressive. The absence of the camera punch hole further emphasizes the size of the screen, and the motorized selfie camera that pops up when needed is something that not so many phones have. It is also a sign that you can forget about IP certification and water and dust resistance, although to be fair, I do not remember seeing a Xiaomi device that had one. If this is an important feature for you, then I would suggest checking out something made by brands like Apple, Samsung, or Huawei. The Super AMOLED screen used by Poco is one of the better ones we had the opportunity to see, especially in terms of brightness. The advertised 500 nits are noticeably there, and if necessary in direct sunlight, the backlight can get boosted to allow a good visibility and usability even on the brightest day. In addition to the large dimensions, the weight of almost 220 grams belong in the phablet category, and it definitely takes some time to get used to, especially when you hold the phone with one hand. It is worth mentioning that materials used are really flagship worthy, with Gorilla Glass 5 protection on both front and back with the aluminum frame. If we think about it, flagship models are characterized by powerful hardware, often the best on the market, quality build and materials, excellent cameras, and a bit of that wow factor that somehow separates the phone from the competition. Does the F2 Pro meet all of these requirements? Well, let's go ahead and check in that order. The Snapdragon 865 is Qualcomm's strongest chipset on the market. The 7nm production process, in addition to the best available performance, also offers low power consumption and an integrated 5G modem, an item that is becoming an increasingly popular or unpopular depending on your opinion about this technology. For those of you interested in the details, the new Snapdragon 865 chipset features 8 Cryo 585 cores and a 1+3+4 combination. The CPU part of the chipset is divided into 2 parts, 4 Cortex A77 and 4 Cortex A55 cores. The fastest core on the A77 block runs at 2.84 GHz, followed by the 3 at 2.42 GHz and 4 A55, intended for less demanding tasks at 1.8 GHz. This kind of architecture has proven to be a versatile solution for various uses, from the most demanding scenarios to those in which lower power consumption is crucial, which is why we will continue seeing it on various devices. The phone comes in 2 different versions, 6GB of LPDDR4X RAM and 128GB of storage, or 8GB of LPDDR5 RAM and 256GB of storage. And with the price difference of only 50 euros, the weaker model does not look so appealing in comparison, especially since in the best Apple manner you are not able to expand the storage via memory cards. The difference in memory throughput between the two versions of the phone is about 30%. LPDDR4X runs at 2133 MHz and has a throughput of 33.4 GB per second, while LPDDR5 runs at 2750 MHz and provides 44 GB per second throughput. The Snapdragon 865 comes with the latest edition of Adreno 650 graphics, which is the most powerful mobile GPU built into smartphones. Compared to its predecessor, the 640 version that comes with the Snapdragon 865 comes with the latest edition of the Adreno 650 graphics, which is the most powerful mobile GPU built into smartphones. Compared to its predecessor, the 640 version that comes with the Snapdragon 855 chipset, synthetic tests show more than 25% better graphics and CPU performance and 35% improved efficiency. We will also mention that the Adreno 650 supports driver updates through the Play Store, as well as the screens with a refresh rate of 144 Hz, but we are yet to see phones with that refresh rate. When you add up all of the above, whether you have chosen a version with more or less system memory, there is no mobile game that will not run on this phone in its full glory and maximum details. Also, multitasking is something that the mighty Snapdragon handles with ease. No matter which application you choose, everything will work flawlessly, which is the point of today's most powerful mobile chipset. Now, the Poco F2 is advertised as the phone with liquid cool technology version 2.0, and I was very interested to see the effect of such a cooling solution. However, after half an hour of playing Asphalt 9 and multiplayer, it turned out that the Motorola Edge Plus was actually 1.5 degrees to 2 cooler than the Poco F2. Edge Plus reached 37 or 37.5 degrees Celsius, and Poco F2 about 38.5 to 39 degrees. So, manufacturers' claims should not always be taken for granted. Even if the measurement result was completely identical with a certain tolerance taken into account, there is definitely no concrete improvement with this type of cooling. Unless Motorola did something magical that they failed to mention in their promo. Premium materials and more expensive phones guarantee structural integrity and higher quality design, so the Poco F2 Pro is not much behind from the best. Quality glass screen, Gorilla 5 protection on the front and the back, perfectly fitted with a slightly curved aluminum frame, leaves a really good impression. When you add a slightly matte finish on the back, which further emphasizes the camera system, the phone is one of the nicer looking models we've seen lately. The downside of using these materials is the soap looking effect and easy collection of fingerprints, which is something that cannot be avoided. Fortunately, the silicone case that comes in the package solves the problem of slipperiness and fingerprints on the back, and since it's transparent, it does not ruin the appearance of the phone too much. The metallic color of the electric purple frame is very elegant and a nice contrast to the matte shade on the back. Discreet, but striking enough not to make a design boring. The red power button also breaks the monochrome monotony and is very striking detail that I really liked on this phone. Interestingly, Xiaomi did not make symmetrical antenna strips, so there's one on the left and bottom and two on the top and right side, arranged close to the edges. Xiaomi has also decided to keep the left side of the phone clean, with no keys or ports, and on the right there are two volume keys and the red power button. On the bottom there's a primary microphone, a slot for 2 nano SIM cards, a mono speaker grill, and a USB 2.0 C-type port. On the top, you'll find a 3.5mm audio jack, an infrared port, a secondary microphone, and a mechanical selfie camera slot with an LED notification light in the shape of a ring. It is interesting that the Poco F2 Pro has a 3.5mm headphone jack, but it does not have an FM tuner, which is an unusual decision because these two elements usually go together. Since the optical fingerprint sensor is located beneath the screen, the back, apart from the camera body and LED flash, has no other elements. The ring pattern around the camera is further emphasized with dominant elements which stand out in contrast to the stained glass. The camera body itself is circular in shape and the 4 cameras are placed symmetrically. It is a combination of a 64-megapixel main camera, 5-megapixel telephoto macro, 13-megapixel wide-angle lens, and a 2-megapixel depth sensor. Some of our journalist colleagues were surprised by the use of the depth sensor and thought that the 4th camera was there only for the sake of symmetry, so they did a small test. They covered the depth sensor lens and checked to see if it affected the photos. Most of them came to the conclusion that as a camera that is not used and that is being covered does not affect the image quality. We don't know if that's the software of early test specimens or something else, but we found in our test that the difference really exists and that the upper lens, viewed from behind, does in fact work well. This is definitely most evident in portrait mode where defining of the depth of the frame is the utmost importance. Even simply placing your finger over the sensor and moving it drastically changes the definition of the frame depth measurement, so we found that the fourth camera is much more than an element added for symmetry. The main sensor is located at bottom left, just below the controversial depth sensor, and is a well-known 64 megapixel one that uses a quad-Bayer pixel binning technology. This grouping of 4 pixels into one provides 16 megapixel photos that you will use most of the time. But in case you have a lot of light at your disposal and you want to capture as much detail as you can, there is also the possibility of using full 64 megapixel resolution. As we're used to by now, this sensor captures a respectable level of details with precise colors and without much noise. Although it has happened to us that sometimes photos have more noise and are blurrier than we would expect. It is also noticeable that the contrast in the photos is slightly enhanced, which generally spoils the overall dynamic range of the frame. As with enhanced colors in the age of HDR, users are accustomed to images with slightly higher contrast and more vivid colors, so such an image will not be a problem for most of the users. What is noticeable that the quality of the photos decreases with the amount of light. For example, when you go inside, the noise is more pronounced, as well as the amount of detail that the sensor manages to detect. When the night falls, the images are blurry and with an unpleasant noise level, soft edges, and mediocre dynamic range. By using a steady hand and night shooting mode, most of these things are corrected, so it is a warm recommendation to use it whenever you're shooting without much available light. What this sensor definitely does well is color detection, and we noticed a lack of light bleed effects, which is a big plus. Of course, please do take all these objections with a grain of salt, because we looked at this camera with an angle of a flagship model, where we must not forgive any shortcomings. So if we consider this phone to be a competitor to all of the other flagships, then we should apply the same rules. The telephoto macro camera combination isn't something we haven't seen before, but it seems that the 2x zoom Xiaomi advertises comes from cropping of the main sensor, not using the advertised telephoto macro lens. The lack of optical stabilization of the main lens when shooting is noticeable by using 2x zoom, but not too much as is the case with videos. So forget about telephoto, 2x zoom is there more as a way to stuff the spec sheet than something that offers real benefits. On the other hand, a macro camera is a real surprise. The 50mm focal length and autofocus on the 5 megapixel sensor works wonders, and I hope that I won't overdo if I say that this macro camera is by far the best any of today's smartphones have. The presence of the autofocus and 2x magnification option is real rarity, and when you add the quality sensor, the results are phenomenal, even with the lighting conditions are not the best. The images are detailed, sharp, with good dynamic and color detection, and the macro world allows you to play with shallow focus and emphasize on details that always turn out just right. The wide-angle camera covers an angle of 123 degrees and its performance is one grade below the main one. The colors are well reproduced, maybe a little calmer than we would like, but far from imprecise. Dynamics and exposure are good, and the details are decent for an ultra-wide-angle lens. We also have to praise the distortion correction, which is done really well. In low light conditions, the performance of the wide-angle lens also drops, which due to an aperture limitation gathers much less detail than the main camera, and this is quite noticeable. Images are not as sharp, which means less detail and more noise. Color detection is good though, but it is a small plus compared to other disadvantages. A motorized selfie camera is one of the interesting elements in this device. When exiting, there are LED lights on the left and right whose colors can be changed, but we would prefer if they could function as a flash instead of the screen being used to illuminate the frame in low light conditions. The 20 megapixel sensor gives very decent photos, rich in details with good detection of skin tones even when the light is not ideal. Thanks to the powerful chipset, the Poco F2 has the ability to record 8K at 30 frames per second, which puts it one step ahead of the best models of the competition, whose shots in 8K are limited to 24 frames per second. The quality in 8K and 4K is very high quality with a lot of detail, nice dynamic range, and almost no noise. There is a noticeable lack of optical stabilization when shooting handheld video on the move, because the electronic stabilization fails to compensate enough for the frame movement. On the other hand, if you keep your hands calm, the video will be drastically better. Even the wide-angle camera performed well with 4K shots with good frame correction and a high level of detail. It is also interesting that the macro camera can record video, albeit in 1080p, which is not exactly common. Of course, keep in mind that the lack of stabilization is a very aggravating factor here, so if the phone is not on a tripod, don't even bother to shoot in such conditions. We've seen MIUI 11 on Xiaomi phones, and the familiar environment hasn't changed much on the Poco model, although the phone has a Poco launcher. Most new software graphical user interfaces go towards simplicity, so even Xiaomi has not resisted this trend. There aren't many unnecessary applications, and the interface is clean with a fairly large spacing between options. It seems that the Poco launcher has borrowed the best of both worlds, some of the Android 10 features combined with the specifics of the MIUI interface, which work extremely well. With a 4700 mAh battery and a nicely optimized chipset, Poco F2 Pro will provide up to 2 days of battery life. Of course, if you use demanding applications, games, or your screen is often active, you will end the day with about 30% battery. What will come in handy is a powerful charger that supports Power Delivery 3.0, and with 33 watts, it charges the battery to 60% in about half an hour, while according to our measurements from 0 to 100, it takes slightly more than an hour. The good thing is that Xiaomi has decided to opt for support for the widespread Power Delivery 3.0 in addition to Quick Charge 4 Plus, so you can also use chargers from another device for fast charging if yours is not nearby. Our 10-hour YouTube video test with 50% brightness left Poco F2 with 60% battery, which is a fantastic result with one caveat that we've seen on Xiaomi phones for the third time now. Since we leave the video running overnight, in the morning the YouTube interface is active for some reason, and therefore the screen is a bit dimmer, which may affect the result. We have never seen this behavior on any other device except Xiaomi. Snapdragon 865, in addition to 5G, also provides support for 802.11ax Wi-Fi, or the more popular Wi-Fi 6, which guarantees speeds of 1.8 GB per second. There is of course Bluetooth 5.1 with all of the current codecs, and USB-C is unfortunately a 2.0 type, and we would honestly prefer to see a more modern interface. Although we couldn't find any flaws in the Snapdragon 855 chipset when it comes to speed, it is similar with the new iteration of the Qualcomm chipset. Superior speed is most evident in games, while the phone reacts quickly to all the tasks that are put in front of it. The simple and optimized MIUI interface with Poco launcher also contributes to this. In performance tests, Poco shows dominance in all aspects, even compared to the 2 or 3 times more expensive models, which brings it closer to the legacy of the series to which it belongs. To sum up all of our thoughts, if the primary camera of this phone was equipped with optical stabilization and a slightly better sensor, without a doubt the F2 Pro would be a new flagship killer. However, the camera is still one of, if not the most important aspects of the modern phone in the eyes of the audience. Although the Poco F2 Pro has 8K at 30 frames per second and the best macro camera we've seen so far, it still doesn't sound as attractive as 5x optical zoom or 108 megapixels, and honestly it's not even close to the latest camera systems on Samsung, Huawei or Apple phones. When looking at the facts, the Poco F2 is a high mid-range phone that is beefed up by the Snapdragon 865 chipset. Even positioned like that, it still offers the most in the newly established price category of 600 euros or roughly $700, a segment that is just somehow emerging on the wings of Snapdragon 765G processors, like on devices like Motorola Edge, Nokia 8.3, LG Velvet, and the resurrected HTC U20, and maybe even a Google Pixel 5. A Poco F2 offers a stronger, better chipset than all of them. If you're someone who uses the phone mostly for gaming, the Poco F2 will be a really great choice. The Poco F2, as well as other phones I mentioned, will have to fight against the tradition, and the data is definitely relentless. The price range between 500 and 1,000 euros has achieved convincingly the worst sale results in previous years. Whether that may change now remains to be seen. So the price tag for the 128GB version is $700 or $750 for the 256 option. This time it's not as easy to recommend the Poco F2 to all users as it was 2 years ago, since the series philosophy has been completely changed. But when you put everything on paper and see what you get for 600 or 650 euros, F2 Pro does look like a really great purchase. If you want an ultimate performance, value every penny spent, you're not keen on paying 1,000 plus euros for a mobile phone, then the Poco F2 is the phone for you. Thank you once again for watching Poco F2 review. Don't forget to leave a comment below and also subscribe to our channel. My name is Marco and I will see you next time.